What's up everyone, I wanted to make this quick video about all the updates that I have made for my digital assets that I have used when in the process of creating this procedural building inside Unreal Engine. I wanted to make this separate video to showcase and then also link this video to all the help files, all the help files of each one of these HDAs for everyone to see what exactly has been changed. Most of the node changes are pretty self-explanatory, but some of them are more involved. So let's go ahead and start to go through all of the HDAs that I have changed a bit and what has changed and all that. So let's start with the Stencil geometry node. So the biggest change for the Stencil geometry node is now that we have ability to actually not to pitch or yaw the last part of the tile. So the idea is that let's say we go to the pitch of the tile, and by default there was no option for you to affect the last row. So let's say you start to move your tiles like this, you see that now all of them are getting pitch, but if you go ahead and deselect it, you see the first one is not going to do it. So this is good. So this went very useful for me when I'm creating this kind of a roof. And basically that means that you don't want to actually pitch the last segment of the roof because you want to make it as snug as possible to the actual roof geometry, to the edge of it, like this. So this would be the good example when you would use when you would disable you would disable the effect first row. And the same option is also available for the yaw of the geometry, but only for the last piece of the last part of each row. So let's go ahead and say let's yaw and let's affect the last row entry. You see, you can also disable it, and you can also invert the part that is being that has been applied rotation or not. So this has not really gone. This has not really been very useful for me now, but since I'm giving ability to pitch the last row, ability to deselect it, it makes sense for me to also disable the yaw. But in the future I might going to apply some changes to it to see when exactly it was useful for me to actually deselect the effect of the last row entry or reverse, but right now it hasn't really be very useful for me at least. But there might be cases when it is useful. So this is kind of a new feature. And one last thing that I wanted to show is actually I have fixed the bug that was for this piece attribute. For this piece attribute parameter. So I'm not really sure how it snuck by, but basically the idea is that this piece attribute is actually hard coded to the, I think, piece underscore attribute name of the piece attribute as attribute name. So this shouldn't really be the case. We were able to select the piece attribute, and it should be dynamically selectable, and then select the tile. So this bug was only present when you would not select the subset of your piece attribute tiles. So now it should be fixed, and all your tiles should be classified by your piece attribute correctly, and also split when you only want to select the subsection of it. You can see that if I select the piece 0, now only these tiles are here, and piece 1, the other ones, which are a little bit more high resolution and a little bit of a mountain stop applied to it. So this is kind of a bug that was fixed for this update for the Stencil geometry. So that's basically it. Let's move to the next one. Let's go to the import geometry in Unreal node. So this node has been updated with 2 new features. And now what we can do is actually specify that the geometry file that we actually import is a point cloud. If you are basically in the single mode for the node, and you have option to say this is a point cloud. So that means that we do not try to import any new geometry. All the geometry that we want to see is already in the content browser, and we just want to instantiate it from the point cloud. So if you go ahead and toggle it, in this case, I have basically instantiated my entire building, and this is a mix of repeating geometry like under the building, and then all the unique pieces like a walls and roof. If you toggle it, we basically skip bunch of these Unreal output name and bake folder tests, because at the end of the day, when you import your point cloud, all the data is already inside content browser, it is assumed. And another feature that I have added is the ability to rename attribute to CD. So this really came very useful, since I wanted to import a bunch of geometry with some vertex with some noise, or maybe like a uh, with some edge information, basically the concavity and convexity information from that is stored in the vertices of the geometry, and it is automatically picked up through the Houdini engine as a CD attribute. But the annoying part is that the CD attribute, it will always be visible inside the Houdini viewport. So basically, idea is that before we actually import our geometry, we can actually rename the attribute that we want to rename to the CD, so that the vertex information will be written down inside Unreal Engine, but not seeable inside Houdini. Just as basically in Houdini, it would be renamed to something else. So in this case, you have to select the type of what type of geometry it was, what type of attribute it is, primitive, point, or vertex, and all of these are supported inside Houdini engine. And then you have to give it a name that your color attribute is named on the file. And by default, I actually renamed all my color attributes as a _CD. And then basically, if you go ahead and this toggle is on, and if it has found this attribute, it's going to rename it to the CD, and that means that the vertex color information will be picked up by Houdini engine and inside Unreal Engine. Another node that has received a small update is Geometry Collection IO node. So let me go ahead and save this collection. And the idea is that now we have ability to clear the directory. So the new button has been added. And if you take a look at this collection that has been saved out, so these are all our meshes that has been saved out. What we can do is go ahead and say clear directory and say clear. A lot of the time when working with Node, I found myself going manually to the directory where the collection is saved out and cleared it out, because I wanted to make sure that there's no other geometry, maybe some old geometry data has not been left there before I save my new collection. So now we have ability to clear out this directory automatically with this button, and you will notice that it actually won't remove any subdirectories or any content inside subdirectories of this collection directory here. So you can kind of save some geometry inside the subdirectories of your collection, of directory where you save your collection. So, but at the end of the day, it's just the ability to clear out your directory before saving, and making sure that the only data that is stored inside this directory is your geometry collection. And the last node that I want to talk about in this video is the Write Unreal Attributes node. So this node has received the most updated features, and it is basically it has been made to be more user-friendly and more straightforward. So first of all, let's start with the base attributes. These are the same. The post base attributes has been streamlined. So right now we only have one option, and it is to construct the Unreal Instance attribute. So it's going to automatically, so in previous version I have ability to select from the attributes that are usually used to construct Unreal Instance, which is basically Unreal output name and Unreal bake folder. So these two attributes can now be automatically combined to construct Unreal Instance attribute, and this is why. So this is basically automatically going to construct it and set it as a point attribute. So this is just a more streamlined version of the previous implementation. And now let's go to the Unreal materials. So this has actually received quite a big change. So first change that you might notice is now we have ability to see the material assignment. You will see that you can select your group and then you can also color this group. And now in the viewport, I actually can see visually what kind of how many materials and what material has been assigned to each one of these using these visualizers. And one thing to note that this visualizer is using this internally. It uses the visualize node. So that means it's going to automatically pick up attribute called visualize attribute called the Unreal Engine Math Assignment visualizer. It's basically going to make sure that you select this visualization. It's going to automatically show it inside the viewport. But the output is not actually going to carry these color assignments because we are using this viewport output flag for the node, which I have talked about in my previous videos. And once you start working with this whole setup, you will notice that this is much more streamlined version of the previous node on how to work on assigning materials, because in previous versions, the autofill option assigned this kind of a default material path to each one of these, and now the autofill button is a little bit more smart, as you might say, because if I go ahead and say autofill, you'll see it won't do anything if my multi-parameter is not set to 0. So if it is set to 0, it's still going to take each unique value for each piece attribute value and assign this default material path. But if it is not, it won't do anything because it assumes that you have your group set up in more specific ways, because a lot of the ways different multiple parts can have the same material assigned to it. So it makes sense for us to not to mess with any of your own assignments when you want autofill. So the only thing in that case the autofill will do, if the Unreal material parameter is empty, is going to fill it with this default material path. So that's the only thing that it does in this case. Yeah, and then also there is an option. So let's go ahead and say, let's add a new material. You can see automatically it's going to be red, because if you leave it empty, that means you want to assign to entire geometry this Unreal material. So let's go ahead and select maybe something like this. Let's select them manually. You can see we now are overwriting any materials applied. So it's kind of like a layered approach of assignment. Or we can use the selection of this if you select your groups, or you can use this kind of add part, or whatever the attribute is that's called your piece attribute information. You can go ahead and choose your selection like this, and it's going to be used also like add part, roof, and all of that. So it's basically very similar to the group selection option that you have for for any of the specific geometry selection you have when you assign your geometry to. So that's pretty much it. And another feature that I have added for the assignment is ability to assign it by groups. So let's go ahead and select it by groups. Let's clear this out and say autofill. So in this case, since my groups are not actually filled out, you will see that there's a primitive group pool, and I have automatically written out the expression primitive group list. And it is basically a list of all the primitive groups that I have on this geometry. It's going to automatically fill them out with material assignments, but since my groups are not really set up, you can see that whenever you see the black polygons, that means that material has not been assigned to them. So that means all of my primitive groups doesn't really cover entirety of the geometry. So since it is not really done, since I have not set it up for the group assignments. So I can go ahead and clear it out. And yeah, but if let's say if I have set my groups correctly, I would basically remove this group list expression and say, okay, I actually want to use a subsection of my groups that I want to use for my for group assignment. So let me go ahead and say, let me go ahead and clear out this expression. edit expression. Let me go ahead and apply it. And let's say let's back and clipped groups are only ones that I want to use for my my material assignment. If you go ahead and say autofill, you can see these groups are actually, I think, empty, but you will see that only these two has been assigned to the multi-parameter because this is our group pool when we assign by groups. And one last thing that I have streamlined about these write unreal attributes nodes is writing of these simple collisions. So now the writing of collisions should be more straightforward and not as confusing because I have taken out a couple of options from it, basically options that didn't really make sense for it to have. Something like ability to poly-reduce collision, basically collision geometry. That shouldn't really be done with this node. It should be done outside of the network on your own custom setups, and you should just give it to this node, and it should work with it like that. So let's go ahead and try to set up a couple of pretty straightforward collisions for your geometry. So the most basic collision is your simple collision. So inside this node, go to the simple collision. Let me go ahead, go simple collision. Let me deselect everything. If you want your simple collisions, write save write collisions, simple collision, and then the simple collision type, and the collision G or simple should basically be enough for most of the time. And let's go make sure that your output flag is something like here. Since I'm doing it in the live link, and I'm using my output flag negative, since I have multiple output flags, the Houdini actually likes to bake both of these outputs with the Houdini engine. So if you're like me and doing it through the live link, it is important to have your visibility flag on, not the write unreal attributes node, or any node for that matter that outputs multiple geometry types. Even though there is only one output for this node, since I'm using the second output for the visualization portion of for the group assignment, it likes to bake out both of these outputs. So just make sure that you are outputting it any node that comes out of this write unreal attribute. Let's go here and let's go ahead and recook. You can always see your outputs before baking inside this outline detail. Let's go ahead and bake it. And let's take a look at our player collisions. You can see we have written our simple collisions. And now let's say I want to make my collisions a little bit more involved. Maybe I want to apply a simple collision for each one of these geometry pieces by connectivity. So let's say all of these fins, I maybe want to wrap around the simple collision on it. So let's go ahead and take a look at the collision basically setup that you would need to set up inside Houdini. So inside here I have put down a connectivity attribute. It's going to be called class, of course. Connectivity type is going to be primitive, so that's important. And it can be either integer or string. And inside here, only thing that needs to be set up is usage of the piece attribute. And you basically say my piece attribute is class. Actually, and that's basically it. And we can disable. We do not need a custom collision here. And that's basically it. We are now internally what we are doing. We actually are duplicating this geometry. If you take a look at this amount of primitives we have here, we have 25,000, and beforehand we had 12. That is because to get individual collisions basically to have multiple collisions for one static mesh, we need to assign it its own separate geometry for it to basically wrap around each individual element that you want for your static mesh. So it is pretty unfortunate because that means we have twice the size of the geometry that we have to store for our collisions. So there's a couple of things that we can do. So this would be ideally done right at the end before importing inside the Unreal Engine, because we do not really want to store this kind of a geometry on the disk, since it basically makes the geometry twice as heavy. So let's go ahead and take a look at it inside Unreal Engine. Put down visibility flag here. Let me recook it. Let me delete this one and let's bake it. And let's take a look at our simple collisions. You can see we have now written around each one of these pieces by connectivity. And this is great because, so in this case, since our connectivity is like this, but we can assign our connectivity as much as we want. We can maybe separate it manually by some sort of connectivity attribute, or we can give it a custom collision to use it for the connectivity aspect of it. And to show it how we can use a custom collision, custom geometry to use to create our simple collision or whatever collision you want to set up. What I have here, I have taken the boxes and I have wrapped them around each one of the pieces of this toy. You can see it's very blocky collision, but I have made sure that I actually transfer the class attribute because I need it to basically set individual pieces for the collision, just like here. But in this case, since this is our custom collision, I'm going to connect it and going to toggle it, use custom collision geometry. You can see it's automatically actually going to also show it when I enable it. So this kind of geometry that we send to the Unreal Engine. Let me go ahead and take a look at it inside Unreal Engine. Let's delete all of these. Let's recook it. So I don't even think I will actually have to recook it every time. Let me delete this one. Now let's bake it. Now let's take a look at the player collision. You can see now our simple collisions has been made from the custom collision that we have wrapped around from the boxes of the wrapping around. So this is a great way for you to have your custom collisions. You can just write, you can create whatever the custom collision, however many pieces you want to make your custom collisions from. And the option for you to have is also ability to hide the custom collisions if you go ahead and press toggle this one. So when you toggle it, there's going to be this kind of explanation mark that says that the 3D hidden primitive group holds Unreal collision data. So that means that the collisions are still there, they are just not being shown inside the viewport. And if you want to show them, you can put down a visibility and say expose primitives. And now we can see the geometry because basically there's these 3D hidden primitive groups, which are basically kind of like a magic group inside Houdini that automatically whatever primitives you have in this group, it's going to be automatically hidden from you. Even though you still hold all the information for it, you just don't see them inside the viewport. But one thing to know that since we can hide this custom collision, when you import this geometry inside the Unreal Engine, you still need to unhide this geometry because it actually won't capture these collisions, these custom collisions, if you have hidden these collision groups. So that's one thing to note. And that's basically it for this video and all the HDAs that has been updated before my main tutorial about creating this kind of procedural building inside Houdini and Unreal Engine. So this is kind of a video that I needed to make because I have made a bunch of changes that has been influenced by me making this procedural building and basically how that I wanted to make it more straightforward and faster. So these kind of updates I have made for my HDAs, and all of these HDA updates are now available for the Gumroad download. Okay, so that's it, and see you next time.